Coming at you from Bellingham, Washington, this is Twonutsinthesack. I'm Julie.
And I'm Gavin. In this age of information, we all have our lives out there on Front Street. Emails, cell phones, Facebook, radio and satellite communications, all out there in the ether. Did you ever wonder if there is some unintended recipient, an electronic voyeur, listening to, reading, watching your electronic life? As the saying goes, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Tonight, we're going to talk about one of the most clandestine, multi-governmental, and largest listening posts in the world, Pinegap, a large radar and data collection array in the middle of the Australian continent, jointly run by the US, UK, UN, and Australian government. Interconnected with 4 other such facilities, it is a hub of surveillance that keeps the world under the watchful eye of many world governments. But with so much cloak and dagger surrounding the facility, there are conspiracy theories abound about what else goes on at the extremely secretive Pinegap facility. Sit back, relax, and try to shake the feeling that Big Brother is watching.
Approximately 18 kilometers southwest of the town of Alice Springs, Northern Territory in the center of Australia. Since 1988, it has been officially called the Joint Defense Facility, Pinegap. Previously, it was misleadingly known as Joint Defense Space Research Facility. The station is partly run by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, U.S. National Security Agency, NSA, and U.S. National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, and is a key contributor to the NSA's global interception effort, which included the Echelon program. Am I saying that right, Gavin?
Yes, no, Echelon.
Echelon.
See, Echelon is an interesting topic. Though it didn't officially exist until the late 90s, it is allegedly a global network of electronic spy stations able to tap into telephones, faxes, and computers, even bank accounts. The information is stored and sorted in Echelon computers capable of keeping track of millions of records on individuals. Echelon was created in the late 1960s to monitor military and diplomatic communication between the Soviets and their Eastern Bloc allies during the Cold War. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and the United States own and operate the system and form the Five Eyes of Echelon, an Anglophone intelligence alliance party to the multilateral UK-USA agreement for joint cooperation in signals intelligence. Basically, they work together so that they can keep an eye on everybody. But in 2013, Edward Snowden, a former NSA contractor, unleashed a massive flood of documents. The implication is that the Five Eyes have colluded in order to circumvent surveillance laws within their own respective countries and use Echelon to monitor and surveil their own citizens. Echelon had continued to expand the scope of their espionage endeavors to extend their efforts in the War on Terror. Despite the blow dealt by Snowden, the Five Eyes continued to operate Echelon, policing all communications, even those across the World Wide Web. Just a little food for thought next time you fire up your search engine.
In late 1966, in the throes of U.S.-Soviet Cold War, a joint U.S.-Australian treaty called for the creation of a satellite surveillance base in Australia, to be titled the Joint Defense Space Research Facility. The purpose of the facility was initially referred to in public as space research. Operations started in 1970 when about 400 American families moved to Central Australia.
Space research, that's funny.
Okay.
We're going to look at space.
Space Force. Space Force.
Okay, go.
Okay, since the end of the Cold War in 1991 and the rise of the War on Terror in 2001, the base has seen a refocusing away from mere nuclear treaty monitoring and missile launch detection to become a vital war-fighting base for U.S. military forces. In 1999, with the Australian government refusing to give details to an Australian Senate committee about the relevant treaties, intelligence expert Professor Des Ball from the Australian National University was called to give an outline of Pinegap. According to Professor Ball, since 9th of December 1966, when the Australian and United States governments signed the Pinegap Treaty, Pinegap had grown from the original 2 antennas to about 18 in 1999 and 38 by 2017. The early 1980s to 600 in the early 1990s, and then to 800 in 2017. The biggest expansion since the end of the Cold War. Ball described the facility as the ground control and processing station for geosynchronous. Gavin, is that right?
Yes.
That's
Geosynchronous. That was a hard word to get around for you. I'm sorry.
Big words confuse me. Satellites engaged in signals intelligence collection, outlining 4 categories of signals collected. The first, telemetry from advanced weapons development such as ballistic missiles used for arms control verification. 2. Signals from anti-missile and anti-aircraft radars. 3. Transmission intended for communication satellites. And lastly, microwave emissions such as long-distance telephone calls. Ball described the operational area as containing sections. Satellite station, keeping section, signal processing station, and the signals analysis section, from which Australians were barred until 1980. Australians are now officially barred only from the U.S. National Cryptographic Room. Americans are barred from the Australian Cryptographic Room.
Makes enough sense. I won't show you mine if you won't show me yours.
Each morning, the Joint Reconnaissance Schedule Committee meets to determine what the satellites will monitor over the next 24 hours. With the closing of the Noongar base in 1999, an area in Pinegap was set aside for the United States Air Force's control station for defense support programs, satellites that monitor heat emissions from missiles, giving first warning of ballistic missile launches.
So keeping track on who's shooting at who?
Basically.
Okay.
In 2004, this base began operating a new satellite system known as the Space-Based Infrared System, which is a vital element of U.S. missile defense. Since the end of the Cold War, the station has mainly been employed to intercept and record weapons and communications signals from countries in Asia such as China and North Korea. The station was active in supporting the years in Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and every U.S. war since, that's great, Gavin, the September 11th attacks. This is serious business here, and you're belching. The Benwith Hill Station in the UK is operated by the NSA and also serves as ground station for the satellite missions. One of the station's primary functions is to locate radio signals in the Eastern Hemisphere. With the collected information fed to the U.S. drone program, this was confirmed by an NSA document from 2013. Which says that Pinegap plays a key role in providing geolocation data for intelligent purposes, as well as for military operations, including airstrikes. On the 11th of July 2013, documents revealed through former NSA analyst Edward Snowden showed that Pinegap, amongst 3 other locations in Australia and 1 in New Zealand, contributed to the NSA's global interception and collection of internet and telephone communications, which involves systems like XKeyscore. Journalist Brian Tukey states that Pinegap intercepts electronic communications from Australia citizens, including phone calls, emails, and faxes, as a consequence of the technology it uses. According to documents published in August 2017, Pinegap is used as a ground station for spy satellites of 2 secret missions. Mission 7600 with 2 geosynchronous satellites to cover Eurasia and Africa. Mission 8300 with 4 geosynchronous satellites that covered the former Soviet Union, China, South Asia, East Asia, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and countries on the Atlantic Ocean. The facilities of the base consist of a massive computer complex with 38 radomes protecting radio dishes and has over 800 employees.
So radomes are those geodesic domes that are basically a housing for the radar dishes, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
You are correct.
So that's why it looks like there's a bunch of golf balls whenever you see a picture of Pinegap.
I feel like my voice is just terrible tonight. It's like so raspy.
It's sexy.
Oh, thank you. Sexy voice. This is my sexy voice, everyone. NSA employee David Rosenberg indicated that chief of the facility has a senior CIA officer of the times of his service there. The location is strategically significant because it controls United States spy satellites as they pass over 1/3 of the globe, including China, the Asian parts of Russia, and the Middle East. Central Australia was chosen because it was too remote for spy ships passing in international waters to intercept the signal. The facility has become a key part of the local economy.
Pinegap is a facility shrouded in secrecy. And as with many big secrets, there have been many reports of strange activities and dark conspiracies. I've got a top 10 list of the events and conspiracies that range in the scope from reasonable to full-on tinfoil hat. Are you ready?
Let's hear it.
Okay. Number 10. Lethal drone strikes are connected to Pinegap. The drone has become a crucial part of our military. Remotely piloted, they are used for reconnaissance and in some cases used for tactical airstrikes, like the ones in Pakistan in 2013. It is thought that the surveillance and even control of the aircraft originated in Pinegap. This angered many Australians because they did not want to be complicit in America's war on terror, which brings us to number 9, Edward Snowden's claims about Pinegap. Among the claims made by the government whistleblower Edward Snowden is that Pinegap is the hub of the NSA's constant monitoring of the world's citizens. We already know that the facility is used for satellite and communication monitoring, but Snowden claims that everything is in place for monitoring the communications of the vast majority of the world's populations. More than likely, they already have been doing this for many years. Though under the guise of the fight against terrorism, the facility's grasp on world communication is unsettling, to say the least. And now let's dip our toe into the bizarre pool. Number 8. The camouflage door encounter. On December 22nd, 1989, 3 men were returning from an overnight hunting trip. At around 4:30 in the morning, the hunters noticed a hidden door. It was camouflaged by the natural surrounding terrain until it opened in front of them. A huge metallic gray disc silently glided out of the doorway, hovered above the base for a moment, then shot upward. In an instant, it was gone.
Wow.
As the shocked hunters tried to gather their wits, the doors closed, and again it looked as if the doors were never there.
Dang, freaky.
Right? The next day, the men headed to a university and spoke with a professor who wrote a report which he passed to UFO researcher John Lear. The report mentioned that all of the witnesses are reliable, though understandably rather reluctant to discuss what they saw.
What the heck?
But they're not alone in having seen a strange thing around Pinegap. Number 7, we have the flying bathtubs. Almost a decade prior to the hunters' encounter, in 1980, 2 Northern Territory police officers had a similar sighting to the 3 hunters. The 2 officers were looking for a missing child in the area and were assigned to an area that butted up against Pinegap, when suddenly a door opened in front of them, a doorway previously camouflaged. Amazed by the doorway alone, they were more astounded when several bathtub-shaped objects exited the doorway, floated silently above the base, and more unbelievable and more remarkable, a dark hole appeared in the hills around the facility.
You know, aliens bathe too, Gavin.
The unexplained bathtubs, or explained because aliens need to bathe, the unexplained bathtubs entered this opening and disappeared, as had the doorway from whence they came. Both officers spoke to researchers about their experiences, but the mystery of what they saw remains. The next two on the list are also linked in similarity, though separated by a decade in time. Which brings us to number 6, strange blue lights. A cartographer working for the Australian government in early 1973 saw something unexplainable. This is one of the earliest strange sightings connected to Pinegap, the former space research facility. Shortly after midnight, an intense vertical shaft of blue light shot up in front of him, obviously emanating from within the grounds of the secretive facility. He drove closer to the boundary of the facility and saw something he could not understand. Hovering about 1,000 feet above the ground was a large gleaming disc. The disc emitted a second beam of blue light toward the ground into the radomes below it. Again, there was no sound. The blue light shaft disappeared, and another light beam appeared, this time from the radomes toward the disk. This alternation of light sources continued for the next 30 minutes before the disk below began spinning at an incredible rate before shooting off straight up into the sky and disappearing.
Wow, that's incredible.
Right? Another such sighting had 5 witnesses. This is called the mysterious tip that led to strange sightings. The 5 witnesses are allegedly Australian government workers and chose to remain anonymous.
Of course they did.
Of course. The group's leader had been receiving reports of unusual activity in and around the Pinegap facility. In 1984, one message came through that was more ominous and mysterious than the others. Something big was going to happen at Pinegap in the next few days.
Dun, dun, dun.
Unfortunately, no dates are given, allegedly in the interest of protecting the group's anonymity. The 5 men split into 2 groups and separated for best observation of the whole facility. For the first 3 days of their stakeout, they had nothing to report. But on the 4th night, several large troop transports drove toward the radomes around the facility. Large groups of men in coveralls went into the domes. In the midst of this strangeness, a pillar of light shot up from the ground into the sky, and a strange cloud formed around the pillar, high up in the sky. The light went out, and 5 craft descended from the circling cloud.
Whoa!
4 of the UFOs were diamond-shaped, and 1 was shaped like a large cigar. Once over the base, the pillar of light appeared again, but this time emanating from the craft above to the grounds below. This continued for several minutes. All the while, the strange cloud above the facility continued to grow. Then, in an instant, the 5 craft disappeared and the cloud began to dissipate. The last craft sighting we are going to talk about comes in at number 4. Strange activity viewed from a private plane. In 1975, a private plane was flying near Pinegap. The pilot and passengers on board were hoping to get a sneak peek of the goings-on at the secretive facility, and they were not disappointed. A large white object took off from the base below. Almost as soon as the pilot and passengers could focus their eyes on the strange object zooming toward them, it shot into the sky and vanished.
Dang.
Upon landing, the pilot reported the sighting. The pilot and passengers were asked to wait until investigators could arrive and take further detail of their encounter. Upon their arrival, the investigators took down their statements, then allegedly told all involved that they were not to talk about the incident to anyone and essentially forget whatever they had seen. Now that's a lot of weird UFO activity, but that's just the start of the weirdness that has been told about Pine Gap. Let's get into the top 3. Number 3, the many gardeners, quote unquote, of Alice Springs. Now, Pine Gap employs about 1,000 people. Most make their home in Alice Springs, as it's the nearest town, and are for the most part split between Australian and American intelligence. Many people have explored the town of Alice Springs because of its proximity to Pine Gap. With a population of just over 26,000, it is a relatively small canvas. Indeed, there are many Americans living in the town, but if asked about their professions, most will reply that they are gardeners or some other low-profile profession. In a town of 26,000, in the middle of the central Australian desert, there is an abundance of American gardeners. Currently, Alice Springs is home to about 2,000 American citizens. It can be assumed or implied that they work with or at Pine Gap. There is a joint American and Australian project called the Joint Geological and Geographical Research Station, which some conspiracy theorists believe to be a subsidiary of the Pine Gap facility. Maybe they just don't want to talk about their work. Maybe they can't. Or maybe they are working for the uber clandestine projects that make up numbers 2 and 1 on this conspiracy countdown. Is your tinfoil hat firmly in place?
Oh yes, I'm ready. I won't let them read my mind.
Number 2. Operating in other dimensions. With the continued research at CERN and the Large Hadron Collider, conspiracies are abound that they are looking to open doorways to alternate dimensions. Some believe that the Pine Gap facility has been working on a similar technology just for a lot longer. Richard Soder, a paranormal researcher with some clout, aka many letters behind his name, claims that Pine Gap has not only unlocked this technology, but also uses it to operate in other dimensions. A crazy claim in its own right, but not as interesting or outlandish as the reasons given for the claim. They include experiments in time travel and super soldier programs that take place in the future before the super soldier is age reversed and sent back to the past with core memories in place, so when the soldier comes of age again, training will be redundant and reinforcing. This brings us to number 1 on the list. The CIA portal experiments. Another claim of Richard Soder's, he said that a whistleblower named Rich Hansen told him that the Pine Gap facility is home to a portal through which super soldiers are engineered and trained on Mars in the future.
What?
And use time travel to fight in today's wars. Hansen claims that he is walking proof of this theory. He is not only a part of these ultra-secret programs, but he left for Mars military service from a time portal in Australia. Though there is no proof of any kind except Hansen's own statements, it is nonetheless interesting and piles on to the mystery of the Pine Gap facility, outside of Alice Springs in the Northern Territory of Australia. Officially, Pine Gap is only a communication center to, quote, support the national security of both the U.S. and Australia. The facility contributes to verifying arms control and disarmament agreements and monitoring military developments, end quote, making it one of the most important military installations not on American soil, which helps explain the air of secrecy, the 30-foot tall fences surrounding the facility, and bi-hourly patrols of the grounds, but doesn't explain away the fantastical sightings and stories that seem to line up despite being decades apart. The theories about a massive substructure under the facility or operating in other dimensions, even a portal to Mars, none are provable past witness testimony. They are nonetheless interesting. Barring a full and unfettered disclosure from all parties involved, we'll probably never know. If that ain't a kick in the sack, I don't know what is.
All right. Please be sure to go to Facebook and give our page a like, Two Nuts in the Sack. And please be sure to go to our YouTube channel, like, subscribe, and for God's sakes, comment and give us some feedback.
Seriously.
All right, this is Two Nuts in the Sack, signing off.